Hello there everyone and welcome to my latest Skyrim build, one designed for the legendary difficulty setting and also to give a vastly different gameplay experience to what you may be used to. If you want these builds to keep being made, make sure to give the video a like and a share, and subscribe to the channel too. If you're looking for any specifics of a build or to skip ahead to a section, then there will be timestamps in the description below, but if you want to hear the backstory I put together for this character, then just keep on watching. The young Outma was once a promising student of the mystical arts. She outclassed all of her teachers and could learn the most complex of spells with ease. This aptitude with the arcane meant her family was constantly seeking out new tutors for her to learn from, but none of them were up to the standard she required to teach her to her true potential. Her natural talent made her arrogant and aloof, convinced that she was better than everyone else. In her free time she would read through the tomes in her family library to learn more about magic and the rise of the Aldmeri Dominion. In her pursuit of knowledge, she was never truly satisfied, constantly seeking out more to help satisfy her craving. Despite her seemingly perfect life during the day, once it turned to the night, the whispers began. A dark voice speaking in an ancient tongue would tell her about the powers she can unlock if she would just accept what was out of her reach. At first she thought she was going insane, having read of mages who had started off hearing voices in their head and eventually completely losing their minds. But as the nights continued to pass, she became less certain. The voice taught her things she could never learn from her teachers, and she came to view it as her real tutor, whispering words of wisdom into her mind, and granting her power she could only dream of. As she begins to listen closer to the voice, it starts instructing her what she should do during the day, the whispers becoming ever present and sometimes overwhelming her own mind. Hours would pass where she wasn't certain what had taken place and only had faint memories of what she had been doing. As the voice begins promising more and more power, it demands more too, starting with animal sacrifices, but leading to whispers of murder. As she continued to follow orders, she became less attached to all those around her. The family that had lovingly raised and nurtured her were now meaningless pawns who only stood in her way. The young elf who had always smiled when he saw her now held no place in her mind, and all the others who would speak to her on a daily basis were just ants for her to crush underfoot. When the voice told her that they all needed to die, she didn't even hesitate, summoning an Atronach and sending forth fire from her hands. The fight was of little challenge to her. Despite being severely outnumbered, none of her opponents came anywhere close to her skill. She mercilessly slaughtered every one of them. Even as her family begged her to stop, she consumed their flesh with flames and left their charred corpses behind. Once all around her were dead, the voice told her to travel to Solstheim, but the journey would not be an easy one. She had to evade the Dominion and the Empire, leading to her taking a longer route than she had planned, eventually crossing over to Skyrim. At the border, she is caught up in an ambush, and before she can cast a spell, she takes a blow that knocks her out, not waking up until she is on the wagon to Helgen. The main skills of this build are Conjuration, Destruction, and Restoration. Conjuration is the primary skill of the build. We will be relying on Atronachs and reanimated corpses to do most of our fighting for us, so it is imperative that we make sure they're up to the job. The most important perk in the tree will be Twin Souls, which will allow us to have an additional Atronach or zombie, a huge asset to a build such as this. Destruction is going to be the skill that allows us to directly deal damage. Instead of using the standard destruction spells, we will instead be focusing on the rune spells. These cost a lot more Magicka, so we can't keep casting them constantly, and should instead cast them into large groups of enemies to hit multiple of them at once, or in the path of enemies so they will run over them whilst your Magicka is still recharging. As is to be expected, runes can be a bit tricky to get the hang of at first, especially if you've just come from a standard destruction mage, but I find they're great for carefully planned engagements, and are also much more forgiving with your accuracy, as you won't be relying on directly hitting the enemy. Add in the Rune Master perk and the fact that there are runes for all three elements, and you can use them in a fair few different ways, be it slowing down enemies with a Frost Rune, or depleting the Magicka of a room of mages with a well-placed Shock Rune. Let me know in the comments if you have any particular tips for using runes, as they are something in the game I still have yet to master, so I'm sure there's more for me to learn. The last main skill of the build is Restoration. Obviously this is helpful for healing us, but in this build that is a secondary purpose to it. Instead we will want to focus on getting the recovery perks to give us a boost to our Magicka regen, and we'll want the Ward Absorb perk. This will make our wards absorb 25% of a magicka that hits them, a great help against mages and dragons, as it means not only will our wards protect us from their attacks, but it will also recharge our magicka supply, ensuring we aren't having to sacrifice our magicka bar on keeping our ward up. The additional skills are Smithing, Heavy Armour and Alchemy. Smithing and Heavy Armour are going to tie into one another to help us hit the armour cap. This build doesn't have a ton of survivability, but with smart use of wards, we can deal with mages, and by reaching the armour cap, we can ensure we survive at least a couple of physical attacks. Alchemy is going to help us in a couple of ways. First and foremost will be in making money. If you've been watching my Skyrim No Kill series, you will see how easy it can be to make money from crafting potions, and we are going to need a ton of gold, as it costs 11,000 gold to complete the Unearth quest, which will get us our armour. I suggest focusing on making as many profit potions as you can early on, and then, once you have a large enough stockpile and a higher alchemy skill, start making potions to enhance your abilities as a mage. My personal favourite potion to make was Fire Salts plus Jazzberry Grapes plus Red Mountain Flower, for a potion that restores, regenerates and fortifies magicka all in one. Seriously, this is a beast potion for any mage, and it's fairly easy to make. I'm sure you will have some favourite potions to turn to, and feel free to tell me if you have any that will work particularly well for this build. When levelling with this build, you will want to put every level up into magicka. You need a huge supply of magicka with this character, so go all out. There's no point putting the occasional level into health if you're not going to have enough magicka to keep you going in a fight. As a standing stone for this build, I ended up going with the Ritual Stone. This grants you an amazing power, and works insanely well with the Ahzidal's Ring of Necromancy, which I will talk about in the equipment section. That being said, most of the standing stones work well with this build, and you'd struggle to make a bad choice regardless of what you go with. Highborn is amazing. It's the racial power of a build and will save your life nearly every day, by granting us a ton of magicka to play with thanks to the huge regeneration it grants. This will be the main power to focus on with this build, but obviously various shouts can help us too. Out of all of the shouts, Slow Time and Whirlwind Sprint are probably the best ones to go for, as they help you keep distance with your enemies, a critical part of this build. Although this build doesn't use any weapons, I would recommend keeping a small supply of staves on hand, especially early on. Before you have a particularly large magicka supply, these will help out no end in keeping you in the fight, and they help out with the versatility of the build too. The armour for this build is the full set of Ahzidal's armour and both his rings. In addition, it's worthwhile picking up Ahzidal's mask at the same time. Ahzidal's armour of Retribution has a decent armour rating, and gives a chance to paralyse any enemies who strike us with a melee attack. We obviously don't want to be taking too many hits, but this gives us a good way to potentially survive attacks, as I found on multiple occasions that this power stops an enemy from getting additional attacks on me, and I was able to get a good distance away from them as they lay helpless on the ground. Ahzidal's Helm of Vision is a key part of this build, giving us greater range on our Conjuration and Rune spells, truly letting us work as a long-range mage. This does come with a penalty of them costing 25% more though, hence our need for a large supply of magicka. At first I thought this would be crippling, and in all honesty it was early on. Once you get used to keeping a good distance from a fight though, it actually becomes incredibly helpful, ensuring you never have to get too close to an enemy and can always stay out of harm's way. Ahzidal's Gauntlets of Warding are going to tie into the Ward Absorb perk, adding another 50% to that effect, totaling us absorbing 75% magicka absorption from our wards, which will make dealing with mages and dragons far less of a problem than it normally is. This does come with the downside of them being 25% less effective, but I honestly didn't find this to be much of a drawback. As long as you're not using them in close combat, which you shouldn't be engaging in anyway, then you likely won't notice the difference. Ahzidal's Boots of Water Walking have the eponymous ability of letting you walk on water. At first I viewed these as purely a fun gimmick, but after it clicked that melee enemies are absolutely useless when they're swimming, this suddenly became an incredibly powerful item. If you can get yourself onto a body of water, you can just cast your action arcs and runes onto land, and ensure that most enemies can't even get to you. Ahzidal's Ring of Arcana and Ring of Necromancy are both going to be helpful. The Ring of Arcana lets us cast Ignite and Freeze, giving us the ability to cast a couple of great spells for dealing direct damage whenever our action arcs aren't quite doing the job. Ignite is a little better for damage, but Freeze is great for slowing down enemies. The Ring of Necromancy turns your reanimated corpses into ice bombs. As soon as they take damage, they will explode for 50 points of frost damage, and this works incredibly well with the Ritual Stone. Be careful with this ring though, as ranged enemies will deal with your exploding zombies with ease, and you don't want you or your follower standing too close when they detonate. You will also be picking up Ahzidal's mask at the same time as getting this armour, and it can be quite helpful for boosting your damage or defence if going up against a fire-based enemy. The Ahzidal set doesn't come with a necklace, so I decided to go with the Necromancer Amulet. This will boost our Magicka supply, and also counter part of the downside of our headpiece, by reducing Conjuration costs by 25%. The drawback of a much slower health and stamina regeneration isn't a huge downside, as we can just counter this with crafted potions or the use of healing spells. Your main focus will of course be on unearthing Ahzidal, so factions should be of a secondary concern. As a mage though, it will make sense to join the Mages College to help raise your skills, and give you access to all the resources you need. After you have completed Unearthed, you will need to find a new purpose. As an evil and powerful Conjuration mage, I would suggest maybe joining the Dark Brotherhood, and getting your summoned Remora to cut down your targets. This isn't essential however, so feel free to leave suggestions in the comments for what factions would be worth joining. Rallis Sederas is the ideal companion for this build, but if you accidentally end up killing him, then you can always just go for Teldrin or Talvas. Rallis was previously serving Ahzidal, and you share that in common with him, but how you treating him is down to you. I personally had planned on making him my slave, and replacing the role that Ahzidal himself once held, but you may wish to see him more as an equal, if you want a change of heart once you vanquish the Dragon Priest. This character plays as a long-range conjurer who will also use runes to guard herself from attackers. The key to this build is to never let yourself get drawn into the actual fight, instead staying on the sidelines and using your army of zombies and Atronachs to do the fighting for you, whilst you support them with well-placed runes. This build plays incredibly well in open areas due to the large amount of space you can keep between you and your enemies, but it does struggle a little more in close-quarter engagements. This does have the annoying side effect of making the quest to gain the armour for this build a fairly tricky one, especially on Legendary, as you won't be able to take many hits. That being said, as long as you're smart and patient, you should be able to get through the mission fine. However, you probably won't be acquiring the armour until the build is pretty close to completion, so you may want to focus on skill boosting early on to power through the levels. In terms of roleplaying, you should focus entirely on finding Ahzidal and serving his bidding, right up until the point where you actually encounter him. At that point, you will be forced to kill him, as he betrays you, and you then have a choice to make. Do you replace him and use your power to take whatever you want from those weaker than you, or do you have a change of heart, as his grasp over you has faded, and instead return to focusing on your studies, and seek redemption for what you have done? I leave the choice of that up to you. Thank you all so much for watching this build. I apologise that there wasn't a Skyrim build out last week, but things have been a little hectic for me recently, so getting videos sorted has been a little tricky. Thanks to all of you who leave comments behind telling me that you enjoy my videos though, as those comments really do keep me motivated to keep working on builds. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like behind, as it helps the video do better, and feel free to leave a comment below telling me if you're planning on using this build and how your progress goes, as this is a bit of an unusual one. If you want something to watch right now, then either check out one of my featured channels, or click on one of the on-screen links.